Hi, this is Gary with MacMost.com. Let's take a look at what makes the MacBook Neo different. Now, the MacBook Neo is not just a lower-end MacBook Air, nor is it a new version of the previous model named just the MacBook. It's a very different model that makes a lot of different compromises to bring down the price. Let's take a look at what really makes the Neo different. Now, I really do have to start by talking about price. That's a major difference, not because it's the reason for almost all of the other design decisions around the MacBook Neo, but because it's a very different price than Apple's had before. If you look at all of the models named MacBook, since Apple started using that name for their laptops, there's nothing that even comes close. In 2006, the first MacBook was actually $1,099, much more than the $599 starting price for the Neo. And if you adjust that for inflation, it would be $1,750 today. So you can see it's a big difference. Now, some of Apple's MacBook Air models actually went lower than that, but never below $999 for the base price. And again, that was a while ago, so adjust that for inflation. In fact, only one model actually came close to this price, and that was the 2020 M1 MacBook Air. This model was for $799 at the base, and that was for a measly 128 gigs of storage. Now, jumping into the physical differences here, you have to start with the processor because that's what really makes this different. Apple's never come out with a Mac using their A series processors. Those are the ones that go into the iPhones. And for the MacBook Neo, Apple's using the A18 Pro, which we previously saw in the iPhone 16 Pro. So the A processors for the iPhones and a lot of iPads and the M processors are, of course, related, and they're developed by Apple. So it makes sense that they could run Mac OS. Matter of fact, the original developer kit for the M series Macs was actually an A series processor. Now, the A18 has fewer CPU and GPU cores than any M processor, but that doesn't actually affect single core performance. And in fact, for tasks that just use one CPU core, which are a lot of things that regular people do all the time, it's going to be pretty fast, actually kind of similar to an M4 Mac. So you're not going to notice too much performance difference there. But if you're doing things that use multiple cores, like rendering video or doing 3D graphics, for instance, then you're going to notice the difference, and it's going to seem more like an M1 Mac than an M4 Mac. But there are huge benefits here. In addition to the cost of the A18 Pro being cheaper than the M series processors, it's also very energy efficient because it's meant to go into iPhones. So it's going to save on energy consumption, which will allow Apple to have a smaller battery, which we'll get to in a minute. Another way that the MacBook Neo is different than previous MacBooks is it has fewer options than ever before. Usually, Apple gives you a bunch of different memory and storage options. And for MacBook Pros, sometimes additional screen options and other things as well. But for the MacBook Neo, you get exactly two options, and that's it. No more. You get the base model, and you get a model that's $100 more that simply doubles the storage and adds a Touch ID button. There are no other options. It's kind of unique for Apple to only offer two options like this instead of a whole menu of choices. Of course, you do have color choices, and we'll get to that a bit too. The ports on the Neo are also unique. Now, Apple's had a variety of different port configurations, including a 12-inch MacBook Pro that only had one USB-C port. The MacBook Neo actually has two, but each one is very different. There's one that's a combination USB 3 and DisplayPort port. So you can use it to hook up a fast peripheral, like a fast drive, or you can hook up an external display. The other one is a slower USB 2 port. You can use this one for charging since data speed doesn't matter for that, or for hooking up any peripheral where it doesn't need anything faster than USB 2 speeds. But you can't hook up a display to that one. It's kind of a unique configuration. The 2020 M1 MacBook Air had two ports on it, but they were both the same, not very different like these two ports. And also, there's no MagSafe adapter here like the other current MacBooks. You actually charge it by plugging into one of these two USB ports, which Apple's done many times over the past with their MacBook line. So that's not too unusual either. Of course, it makes it very easy to charge this. You can use almost any USB-C charger for it. Another big difference that a lot of people haven't picked up on yet is the trackpad is different. This isn't the same trackpad that's on the MacBook Air or MacBook Pro that you would get now. Since 2017, the trackpads in MacBooks don't actually move. They're completely solid. Now they feel like they move because there's haptic feedback. They actually vibrate a little bit when you click them, and it kind of feels like you're pressing down. But they don't actually move. But the Neo's trackpad is a mechanical trackpad. It actually presses down when you press on it. Now, for a lot of normal things, it's not going to make too much of a difference. It should work as you expect. But you don't get haptic feedback, and there's a few apps that will use it, say, as you move over different guides stuff in image editing apps. And also, there's a trick you can do with trackpads where you can press down hard. You can force click to do various things in context with whatever you're clicking on. And this trackpad won't do that. So Apple's cut corners here to have a cheaper trackpad and also one that won't use as much power. But there's another difference about the keyboards. The color of the keyboard matches the color of the case. So you get the indigo MacBook Neo. The keyboard's actually indigo. Apple hasn't done this before. The keyboard's just been, the black keys with the white text on them or whatever the current way they were doing it was. So having the colors match the keys is new. And one of the reasons they may not have been able to do that before, and they can do it now, is there's no backlight for the keyboard for the MacBook Neo. Now, all MacBooks since 2010 have had a backlight. So if you're working in the dark, you can see a glow under the keys. Some people like me rarely ever even notice the backlight as they rarely use their MacBooks in the dark. Others don't actually like this and turn it off. But if you like that as a feature, then you're not going to like that the MacBook Neo doesn't have this. Of course, it saves on production cost not to have that backlight there, and it's also saving on battery, allowing the smaller battery, like I mentioned. And keep in mind, if you've got a desktop Mac and you've got, a regular keyboard, you're used to not having a backlight, so it's not going to make much difference to a lot of people. If you find these videos valuable, consider joining the more than 3,000 others that support MacMost through Patreon. You get exclusive content, course discounts, and more. You can read about it at macmost.com/Patreon. Now, about that smaller battery. This is a very small battery for a MacBook. It's a 36.5 watt-hour battery. So it's similar to the 2008 to 2012 MacBook Airs or the more recent 2015 to 2017 12-inch MacBook. Those had a similar size battery, but the difference now is you've got a lot of energy saving going on. You've got this A18 Pro processor, which is very efficient. You don't have the backlight and other things like that. So even with this small battery, you're still supposed to be able to get 11 hours of normal work like web surfing out of the battery. Now, another power-related thing is the charger. The charger you get with this is actually the same as the iPhone charger, a 20-watt charger. Apple's never included a charger this week with a MacBook before. Now, no MacBook before has probably ever been this energy efficient with this small of a battery. And of course, when you're traveling, you can pretty much just charge from anywhere like you can with an iPhone. The MacBook Neo doesn't have fast charging like other MacBooks. So even getting a more powerful charger for it isn't going to make it charge faster. But slower charging is going to be one of those sacrifices for the lower price of the Neo. Another difference with the Neo is the notch. The camera notch at the top of the screen of the current MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros isn't there. Or more accurately, it's there. It just goes all the way across the top of the screen as it did for every MacBook before the notch was introduced. You just have a bigger space at the top instead of the left and right sides having more pixels for the screen. The notch hasn't been standard for that long. It was only introduced in 2021, and even in 2022, Apple was coming out with new models without it. Now, in that screen-wide notch or no-notch area, however you want to think of it, is, of course, the webcam. And Apple takes a step back for a cheaper webcam here. It's the 1080p FaceTime HD webcam as compared to the 12-megapixel center stage camera that's in the current MacBook Air, MacBook Pro. Of course, this camera is cheaper and that brings the price down. And it's really not that long ago that we had these. Say the M3 MacBook Air had this, and in 2020, the M1 MacBook Air didn't even have this. It only had a 720p camera. For regular video conferencing needs, it should be fine. But there's actually another kind of camera that's completely missing from the MacBook Air, and that's the ambient light sensor. And this has been around for a while, even predating MacBooks. It was in PowerBooks before that. And the last time Apple actually had a model without one was 2010. And in fact, since 2018, they've all had an advanced ambient light sensor, a true tone sensor. So what does it mean not having any ambient light sensor? Well, this is used for keyboard backlighting, but there's no keyboard backlight, so nothing to miss there. But it's also used for dimming the screen in lower light conditions, so the MacBook Neo simply can't do that. Another unique thing about the Neo is the speakers. Now, there have been a ton of different varieties of speaker configurations. They've been under the keyboard, next to the keyboard, along the sides, along the top. Apple's done a whole bunch of different things. This setup is kind of unique. It's got two, one on each side. Previously, the M1 MacBook Air had two, but they were under the keyboard, and MacBook Pros have side ones, but more of them. So this is kind of a unique array of speakers. But if you really want higher quality, you're probably going to be putting in AirPods or other headphones anyway. And the Neo does come with a headphone jack, as well as those two USB-C ports. Now, another way the MacBook Neo is different than all of the MacBooks before is environmental. It's the first MacBook with more than 60% recycled materials. And part of that's due to a low-waste manufacturing process. But another part of that is due to using less materials. Remember, it's a smaller battery. Things like the backlight and the low light sensor and other things are just not present, which means fewer materials are being used to make this. Some of those things actually used a lot of rare materials. So Apple is actually producing an environmentally better MacBook by producing a low-cost MacBook. And finally, I need to mention colors. Now, having multiple color choices is not unique. In fact, the 1999 iBook had multiple colors. It was plastic, and it was easy for Apple to give you color choices like the iMac back then. But this is the first MacBook with this specific set of colors, and the choices seem to be things that people are excited about. So as you can see, the MacBook Neo is not just a low-end MacBook Air or rehashing of the standard MacBook from last decade. It's a very different machine. Apple was able to get the price low by making a lot of compromises, but they're hoping that the compromises are in the right places and people will still find lots of good uses for the MacBook Neo. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Want to know about every new MacMost video each week? Sign up for the absolutely free MacMost email newsletter at macmost.com/newsletter.